All right, what's up, guys? I'm back at it again. No stopping. There's not a lot of talking that I have to do right now because I really just want to, get through this. But what's up? It's good to see you guys. There's a lot that I have to do. Right now I just came back from, talking to my cousin, and we just chopped it up. We talked about a couple of things, many things, and yeah, and we just, chopped it up and we talked and. That's that. And I'm still, getting together with everything that I need to do right now. But, we'll elaborate a little bit about that. I just want to make sure that I expand upon that more and that I'm talking about all the things in my life that, need to change. Like, I'm still, looking for that job. You're already let go of college completely. I'm focusing entirely on my mission, which again, I won't tell you what it is. Maybe one day I'll slip it up, but Um, even then, if I do, you're still not gonna know what it really is. So, because there's mental tactics in my mind that I'm playing with. But yes, it's a lot that I have to do, a lot to focus on. One thing that I could mention is that the movie that I was planning to watch, Renfield, it was kind of ass. I'm not gonna lie, like it was very whack and corny. Nicolas Cage is a good actor, but he's very like, but the movie, like the tone and everything was just very, very stupid. So that's that. But you know, that's otherwise. But right now, I'm actually just gonna watch one video, and it's about the weekend. Um, and I'm a massive Weekend fan. I think he's one of our great artists right now. I would say currently right now, like in sort of a massive scale, artistically, like in a very like I'm trying to go in between because like a lot of my favorite artists come from the past, like MJ, Depeche Mode, David Bowie, Susie and the Banshees. Like they come from the past, but currently, obviously it's number one and The Weeknd, and then besides that, I would probably say Kendrick Lamar. Those three, yeah. Other people, they're not necessarily my favorite artists. They just have really great like soundscape or music or an album that I like, but they're not my favorite. But I can't really think of anyone actively besides those three people. So there. All right. Okay. Well, let's get to it. It's sort of it's a Volkgeist film. Talking about his past, basically his whole story. It's like about 43 minutes. So let's get to it. All right. Um. um, There you go. All right. Cool. Let's get into it.
Having just hit 100 million monthly listeners on Spotify, the first person to ever do so, The Weeknd very well may be the most popular artist in the world. I think it would be fair to say he is the biggest pop star of the 21st century so far. But despite his mind-blowing level of fame, he's still the same artist he always was. And wow, has he made some good music over the years. In a career that's barely a decade long, The Weeknd is already one of the world's best-selling artists, with 75 million albums sold worldwide, billions on billions of streams, and some of the biggest tours and singles of any artist living today.
I'm really glad that he's one of the biggest artists because you know, so no shade to like Drake, Taylor Swift, Bad Bunny. I like Bad Bunny. He's cool, but I think like the Weeknd, he's the most like he doesn't have to do all the things that he's doing. He doesn't have to. He could just be like a generic R&B pop artist and just keep it generic. But he's not. He's really doing the most that he can to make his albums this like spectacle and like this artistic expression, and he's doing exactly what I would want to do if I was a pop artist. Like he's just doing exactly what like I would want a pop artist to do, which is to take those those particular ideas and represent them in such an extent. Like MJ is The Weeknd is basically like an indie alternative version of Michael Jackson. Like especially if you hear House of Balloons, which is my favorite album of his. It's just like an indie alternative, like grungy kind of feel, and it's like it's everything that you would want to hear. It's like that MJ falsetto, that beautiful MJ falsetto, and all those things that like come with it. So I'm just really glad that he exists, like because like of course I understand it as a general rule that most people won't be as interesting because they're just most people will be basic and basic people attract basic people, but there comes those instances where someone like him comes along, and it gives me complete um inspiration and even hope that can be there. So yeah, I'm glad that he deserves it. He completely deserves to be at the number one spot.
But even in a career full of #1 pop hits, he still has a completely unique artistic vision, not just sonically, but visually as well. Because The Weeknd is more than a pop star. He's a creative genius playing a character and creating a world that represents the darkest and most bizarre corners of his mind. He mixes dark surrealist imagery with seductive vocals, with soaring pop melodies and sonic landscapes that range from gritty indie instrumentals with a cult following to
Yeah.
glossy 80s inspired dance pop that stands as some of the most streamed music ever made. But despite reaching these highest heights,
And I'm
any
telling
artist
you, that's exactly what I mean. Because like I feel like there's a lot of gatekeeping type of people that hate when that happens. They hate when their sound goes pop, which is ironic because wouldn't you want it to like thrive? But of course, people they like to play those gatekeeping games, which is the dumbest shit ever. But but when a sound like because like I love indie alternative. That's like my favorite type of genre. Anything that stems from that, the grunt, the punk rock, the that sound, it just stems from that. And anytime there's like a major pop person or just someone massively famous and they take that particular sound, you should be glad and privileged at the fact that someone is taking that sound and taking it to its fullest potential, because you can't take it to the fullest potential because you're a niche. But these kinds of artists, they take it to the fullest potential because their voice is just so magnetic, and you combine that with the most beautiful soundscape, and it just becomes this amazing, amazing thing. Um, that's just this is what it is.
could ever dream of, he's never stopped growing and refining his vision as he gets more popular. But how did he get here? Was The Weeknd destined for success, or did he have to fight through dark and humble beginnings to get where he is today? Let's get into it. This is the story of The Weeknd. If you're interested in more of my creations, I just launched a series of pendants that I designed from scratch. Each necklace is made of full 925 sterling
No
silver,
disrespect, I'm gonna
hand-painted
skip this,
enamel,
bro.
and the designer that their first of the U.S. Ethiopia was born in the winter of 1990 in Toronto, in the U.S. Abel Tesfaye was born in the winter of 1990 in Toronto, Canada, the only child of 2 Ethiopian immigrants, but when he was 2 years old, his father left the family to move to the US. By the time Abel turned 12, his father was completely out of his life with a new family and kids, and he wouldn't see him for at least another 15 years. When talking about his father, Abel later said that he wasn't mean and he wasn't abusive. He was fine. He just wasn't there. Being raised by his busy working-class mother and grandmother, Abel didn't have a lot of guidance in his early life, and he's talked many times about how he was smoking weed, drinking, and taking Xanax and ketamine by the time he was in middle school. At the age of 17, he dropped out of high school and moved from the more suburban area of Scarborough to Parkdale, a neighborhood in Toronto, with 2 of his friends, including Lamar Taylor, who would later become the full-time creative director.
W outfit. I love that outfit. That's so cool. I love the webs.
For The Weeknd. And while his venture out into the world would later prove to be the jump he needed to become the artist he is now, overcoming the darkness he fell into within Toronto's underbelly was also his greatest challenge, as he almost fell into its void forever. From around age 17 to 21, Abel was sometimes homeless, was put in jail more than once, and he also developed a severe dependency on hard drugs while partying in Toronto. While these were clearly dark times, to me they also make Abel's inspiration clear and authentic in a way that many other artists could never claim to be. Unlike some artists who say they came from nothing, but in reality they grew up in the suburbs, Abel actually...
Yeah, that is true. That is true. That happens a lot. I wouldn't say that I exactly have it very difficult. I would say it's a similar existence. It's just that he had, I guess, dysfunctional. I wouldn't say that that's exactly my case, but I guess I'm privileged in that sense. But there's growing pains that come from that. I don't exactly want to elaborate on it right now, but yeah, there is. Oh, I shut it down.
From nothing. And we can see that his artistic affinity for darkness draws from his first-hand experience of being at the bottom of his life, living a nocturnal lifestyle in Toronto, fueled by drugs and partying. He's talked about working in clothing stores by day and riding city buses all night with nowhere to sleep. He was a loner with no money, and he had only 2 things to keep him away from the absolute depths of despair: drugs and music. He would later name himself The Weeknd after this time in his life. When he dropped out of school...
At Wells Fargo, direct deposits come up to 2 days early with early payday. What if everything came 2 days early?
I swear I need to get rid of his ads.
It's the weekend, baby.
Want to get paid up to 2 days early? You can with Wells Fargo.
Johnson, why are you naked? Because my t-shirt sucks. Look at Gibson. He's wearing a true classic tee.
Took his mattress and, quote, left one weekend and never went back home. While he floated around Toronto as a teenager, he began to develop a vision for what he wanted his music to sound like. He was discovering the true extent of his musical talent and beginning to create songs that would later change his life. Singing in the dead of night in front of his friends in the freezing streets of Toronto.
Weekend, weekend, baby, weekend. You don't know what's in store. Know what you're here for. Listen, Joey Styles killed it. Big inspiration right here, baby. You already know what it is. He's gonna blow. We're all family, man.
The story goes that he worked at a clothing store during the day and would spend his nights without sleeping, wandering the streets of Toronto by himself. From sleeping on people's couches and having no stability to singing on the bus, Abel was ready to risk it all to make his dreams come true. What he didn't know is that he was about to change the sound of R&B forever. Abel had a few projects early on before he discovered the identity that would take him to the moon. He was making music with people all over Toronto and building a reputation for being an amazingly talented singer. Around 2010, he met the producer Jeremy Rose, who helped him craft 3 extremely important songs. The Weeknd probably never would have taken off without these tracks. What You Need, Loft Music, and The Morning remain infamous to this day for their sultry darkness. At the time, The Weeknd was nothing, just a name with no backing behind it besides the people Abel knew around Toronto. But the story goes that Drake's manager Oliver El Khatib got wind of the drop through his connections in the local scene. He showed the tracks to Drake, which quickly led to a blog post of endorsement on the OVO blog in December of 2010, the first sign that The Weeknd had the potential to be something big. But at the same time, no one knew who he was.
He looks so different. He looks like every fucking kid that, like, he's like Ethiopian and Canada, and I'm not from there, but funny enough, Houston and Canada have a strong connection. Besides the fact that Drake and Houston and Drake Toronto, Houston, it's like there's a strong connection there for him. But besides that, I would say like just in general, there is a strong connection. But I haven't been there. I hope to go there someday. But yeah, I think yeah, he just looks like every kid. Like this version of him looks like every kid that I know, like light skin, like black dudes, and then fucking Hispanic dudes.
At all. He wasn't just mysterious, he was anonymous. No one even knew if The Weeknd was a singer or a band, let alone what he looked like or what his name was. And that only helped build hype. Not only were his songs completely unexpected in sound and style, but he himself was a total enigma, which only helped build his dark and moody aesthetic. House of Balloons was the first Weeknd project. It dropped out of nowhere in March of 2011, and he quickly followed up that mixtape with two more in the same year, Thursday and Echoes of Silence. These mixtapes form the Trilogy series, and I think they comprise the strongest debut of any artist in recent memory.
You don't know what's in store, but you know what you're here for. Close your eyes.
Often being described as haunted strip club soundtracks, a moody, emotional mix of indie and R&B sounds. The maniacal energy of the two-part track House of Balloons, Glass Table Girls reflects the energy and the ethos of The Weeknd in his early days, both lyrically and musically. An overwhelming, maximalist, grimy explosion of sounds as Abel sings of depravity and drug-addled seduction. The song midway through switches and becomes more subdued, representing the crash once the high wears off. Abel drops his crooning vocals for a menacing, raspy voice as he raps in detail about his debauchery. I think this reveals a lot of The Weeknd's appeal early on. His stories were ridiculous, explicit, and most importantly, toxic. He was a very self-aware artist, depicting his world exactly the way it was, darkness and toxicity included. His stories felt too specific and raw to not be real. Of course, it's not like he invented R&B. These themes have been around music for a long time. What he did do was pair that dark sound with an indie style, inspired by legendary bands like the XX and the Cocteau Twins, creating a fusion and aesthetic that was previously altogether unheard of. It's easy to look at The Weeknd now and think of his commercial success as being almost guaranteed from the start, but it's not quite that simple. When House of Balloons dropped, there was a shroud of mystery between The Weeknd and the media. He was a singer with a haunting Michael Jackson-esque falsetto, singing about drugs and sex in almost scandalous ways. But with no interviews or photos, some early reviews even refer to The Weeknd as a band, not just an artist.
Well, I don't remember that, but like early in the day. I don't exactly remember that, but yeah, I kind of like because this was around the time where like I was slowly getting into kind of more, because like my inception was more early indie alternative, and this was like my gateway towards more pop-esque things, but this was like the middle point, and yeah.
Simply because no one knew what it was. In our contemporary social media-based culture, anonymity can hold artists back. Young artists are expected to maintain a constant presence with a posting schedule, executing artificially generated controversy if they have any hopes of making it big. Abel, who grew up as a shy, secretive person, preferred anonymity and silence. He rejected the pressure to speak outside of the music. By being himself and shunning attention, the secrecy somehow worked in his favor. He created an exclusive in-the-know persona that elevated his reputation to be perceived as classy, mysterious, and provocative. The mystery behind the project created more and more hype as fans tried to decode and decipher who the artist really was. He immediately became somebody by virtue.
The mosquitoes are just all over the...
Quiet, please.
Okay.
Wow.
Hey!
Virtue of being nobody. The Weeknd represented mystery and secrecy, and people loved it. The level of influence that The Weeknd immediately spread throughout the music industry can't be ignored. Even in the first few years of his career, before he had any real mainstream notoriety, he was inspiring tons of artists who would later go on to create their own careers, with the recipe combining dark R&B with indie instrumentals and moody vocals. Dark, atmospheric, alternative R&B became a huge
Yeah, like Frank Ocean, Steve Lacy. Yeah.
force in the industry thanks to The Weeknd. And Abel did open the door for many different artists like Brent Faiyaz, Party Next Door, Division, Giveon, and even Drake, who contracted Abel to help write and feature throughout his career-defining album Take Care, just a few months after House of Balloons was first released. Abel created a new sound for R&B that was quickly and widely embraced, soft and emotional, but toxic at the same time. The first official Weeknd album was Kissland, released in the fall of 2013. During a 2013 interview with Complex, The Weeknd said Kissland symbolizes the tour life, but it's a world that I created in my head. Just like House of Balloons symbolizes Toronto and
What's in my order is House of Balloons, After Hours, Kissland, Thursday, and Dawn FM. In that order.
my experiences there. When I think about Kissland, I think about a terrifying place. It's a place I've never been to before and I'm very unfamiliar with. A lot of it is inspired by filmmakers like John Carpenter, David Cronenberg, and Ridley Scott, because they know how to capture fear. That's what Kissland is to me, an environment that's just honest fear. And the parallel between cinematic influences and Abel's creative process would continue to be a
Night. Oh, yeah.
thread throughout his career. To this day, he continuously references art house filmmakers of the 80s and 90s, such as David Cronenberg, David Lynch, Martin Scorsese, even borrowing their design ideas and production styles with film looks, color palettes, and gritty and sometimes surreal aesthetics in his videos. And you can really hear that throughout Kissland, as the title track includes menacing synths, sampled screams, and dark, hard bass.
Gotta fly back east where the city don't sleep. I'm trying to finish all this potion. Baby, take your time. I'm trying to sip it till the morning.
But while Kissland beat Trilogy in chart performance, debuting at number 2 on the Billboard 200, the reviews weren't nearly as good as the previous 3 mixtapes. The critical consensus considered it lacking,
Which I don't really get, but like, cause like to me, it just seems like a more enhanced version of those 3 albums. To me, like I find it funny that this is like the more underrated one as opposed to those first 3. But I think because I think a lot of it has to do with because this album sounds like a cinematic score, which that is the first type of music that I love. I love that. That's the niches of niches to me because a lot of people you're not gonna find people to obviously listen to that. Like funny enough, indie is more popular than even that. And so and indie can be very weird, but it's even more popular than that. So I always found it funny, but also it is kind of obvious. But to me this is this is yeah, this is like absolutely better. Like it just seems like a more enhanced version of that and the one where like his tonality and the energy is just spread throughout the city because the whole idea of Kissland.
lacking in the bite and catchiness of its predecessor. People said that it repeated too many similar beats and it emphasized concept and storytelling rather than the music itself. In a 2021
Which is fine. That should be cool. It's always a hard. It must be a difficult thing to balance both um, concept, storytelling, and then just having the like prioritizing the music. I mean, the music itself, and making sure that you have like the rocking like soaring anthems that you want. That must be difficult, but I would say he accomplished that very well in After Hours. That's why it's my second favorite, because it's like he accomplished the storytelling and the concept, and then maximize it with this like anthems of blinding lights, save your tears, etc., etc.
GQ interview, Abel would look back on Kissland and consider it a transitional point in his career, stating that, "By the time I got to make Kissland, I was emotionally tapped out. I did 3 albums in 1 year, plus I was working on Take Care at the same time. And me not yet fully transitioning into a pop star, I was in a middle ground. I feel Kissland was that. Very honest, but also stubborn, and not letting a lot of input in. It wasn't that it was bad music. I think people were just confused as much as I was." Taking into account that his first album had been more or less a bit of a flop, Abel became focused on elevating and securing his status into the mainstream A-list atmosphere. He followed Kissland's release with a handful of movie soundtrack and pop features like Devil May Cry for Hunger Games Catching Fire, Earned It for 50 Shades of Grey, and a special guest appearance on Love Me Harder by Ariana Grande.
You make it look like it's magic. Oh, yeah. 'Cause I see nobody but you. I'm never confused.
The latter two becoming The Weeknd's first top 10 hits, with Love Me Harder
Monday.com makes Gantz great again. Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to say again, because they never were, and
charting at 7 and Earned It charting at number 3. These releases hinted at The Weeknd's new creative direction, shifting his original alternative R&B background to a more mainstream pop-oriented sound, inviting high-profile producers and artists into the studio like Kanye, Max Martin, and Ed Sheeran. While some people who had been listening since House of Balloons seemed to...
Wait, let me... 4? Yeah, I'm just wondering where I'm at. Okay, cool.
worry that The Weeknd might end up a kind of sellout, his second album, Beauty Behind the Madness, was nearly perfect. Beauty Behind the Madness was a massive record with a sprawling, dark, fantastical presentation. Abel doubled down on his core themes and ideas and perfected his pop song craft in an exciting way, walking a thinner tightrope between light and dark than he ever had before. With his catchy pop melodies, soaring vocals, and clever lyrics, he was exploring the dark night of his soul and making it sound as poppy as he could at the same time. The two biggest songs off this album are my favorite examples of this dynamic. The Michael Jackson-esque Can't Feel My Face became his first #1 hit, followed immediately by another #1 song, The Hills. Both were critically acclaimed, with The Hills receiving praise for harkening back to The Weeknd's dark, horror-inspired, brooding origins without any concessions, and ultimately becoming Abel's first diamond record.
When you touch me, not feel me, when I'm fucked up, that's the real me, when I'm fucked up, that's the real me, man. Hills and boys, the hills and boys. Who are you to judge? Who are you?
The former became two-time Grammy nominated, and even bizarrely considering its subject matter of cocaine addiction, grabbed a Kids' Choice Award nomination for Song of the Year. And it was right around that time.
That's really weird. That's really weird. These are like the stupid moments of like award shows that like I think they do that on purpose. I think they do.
That The Weeknd became an unstoppable force in pop music. In a way he had never accomplished before, The Weeknd was suddenly an artist you could hear at a backyard college party or an upscale boutique, or even somehow at family-friendly restaurants and stores. He was becoming an unstoppable force of fame. With a long, colorful, and emotional track list featuring artists like Lana Del Rey and Ed Sheeran, and production from giants like Kanye and Max Martin, Beauty Behind the Madness was
Yeah, Tell Your Friends I love that song. I love that song. I don't know if he only did that one, but I love that song.
A gargantuan success, undoubtedly one of the defining pop albums of the early 2010s, without removing The Weeknd's outsider edge. I think he was definitely still on the outside of the mainstream, not for any reason of sales or streams or fame, but simply because he remained something of a mystery. The feeling of being a strange and mysterious character more than a real person or celebrity kept him an outsider even when he was blasting into unprecedented mainstream success. Beauty Behind the Madness debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, initially selling nearly 500,000 copies in its first week, and it was The Weeknd's first #1 album after 4 previous projects. He became an icon overnight with the hair, the voice, and the moody sounds without sacrificing his OG fans for even a minute. Even his biggest hits from this time hold up as cult classic tracks and radio hits at the same time. I still love to hear Hills, Real Life, Tell Your Friends, even despite their mainstream oversaturation. That's a once-in-a-generation musical accomplishment.
Bum, bum, bum.
We are not the same, I am too red.
Far exceeding the impact and influence of Trilogy and Kissland, Beauty Behind the Madness became a milestone record of the 2010s. The kind of album that was so popular even the cover itself became a pop art icon just off how unavoidable it was at the time. It showed that The Weeknd is an artist who can both appeal to mainstream audiences and fulfill artistic integrity in an interesting way at the same time, which is an extremely valuable quality to have. In terms of its sound, Beauty Behind the Madness is one of my personal favorite pop albums. It's definitely not a true alternative R&B indie album like the projects that came before it, but I don't think that automatically makes it shallow and superficial either. I will say this album is less personal and artistic sounding than After Hours and Dawn FM, that's for sure, but it's not boring either. Truthfully, I've always loved its production, and I still do. With all the different influences from disco to funk, soul, R&B, and trap, it's anything but generic, and Abel's vocals tie everything together in a way that feels high class and shiny. Songs like Real Life, Hills, and Often are heavily inspired by trap and R&B, while Can't Feel My Face, Tell Your Friends, and In the Night are far more poppy and accessible. I do think the last 3 or 4 songs on this project are a little bit forgettable, but overall this record made a huge impact on me as a teenager, and I still love it today. From the harsh noise to the smooth sounds, it's a very grand and cinematic album, and it's definitely the project that made The Weeknd the star he is today. After Beauty Behind the Madness, The Weeknd only continued to get more and more popular as a mainstream pop star, headlining multiple festivals, having a few extremely public relationships.
Yeah, I think he's like that album is underrated as like a pop album, I would say. Because yes, you could say like how is it underrated if it's pop? Underrated in the sense of its like artistic integrity, like the greatness of it. Because I don't think it's bad at all. I would say the only one that I think is not bad, but it's just there's a lot of filler in the album is Starboy, and there's a lot of great songs in there like the Die for You, I Feel It Coming, Starboy, Stargirl Interlude, Lonely Night. There's many good songs right there. The one with Kendrick as well, but it's just there's a lot of other songs that are like it's like filler in there, and it's just like I understand the function of it and why it needed to exist there, but I just didn't. I do like the era, but it's also just very There's some parts of it like again they're filler, and those songs are those particular songs that I don't like. They're just too overproduced.
And also continuing his streak of memorable collaborations, appearing on Kanye's FML from The Life of Pablo.
Oh man, dude, I love that. That's my favorite. That when Ye and him collaborate are my favorite thing because these are my two favorite like artists in general, and and their collaborations are oh bro, I just love it, bro. And Tell Your Friends, he has this sort of vocoder part that I love. You hear it in Tell Your Friends. FML, is my favorite song that they've done. It's one of my favorite songs out of the album. I would probably say, I would argue that it's probably my number one favorite. I think what could compete with that is Famous or Wolves, but it's just I love the ending of that song, the way Kanye sings at the end, the melody of the in the verse of The Weeknd, the way he sings right there, everything, and then obviously Hurricane. It's like
Pray for Love from Travis Scott's Rodeo, and 6 Inch by Beyonce from Lemonade, which all made him more of a topic of discussion than ever before. He was a true character at this.
On Road to Millions, our contestants will race to secure the biggest
I
bag.
swear
But along
I
the
hate
way,
this
they'll pick
stupid
up some of
shit.
the lessons.
This time, he was the guy with the shadowy outfits, the giant hair, and the beautiful voice, a newcomer with an edge, and the industry just couldn't get enough. But even through all the wild success Abel found with Beauty Behind the Madness, it would be barely a year before the next Weeknd album completely destroyed expectations and succeeded even more than he had before. The Weeknd was once again inspired for a change. While his image and style had become iconic, he knew he had to grow if he wanted the success to continue. He needed a new identity. He got rid of the freeform hairstyle that had almost entirely defined his image for the last 5 years, and he pushed even further away from his original dark indie sound, instead looking towards a more shiny mainstream pop style that combined trap beats with upbeat production at the same time. And the project felt almost engineered to be as mainstream as possible, one of the most streamed albums of the year, while still being cool and stylistically substantive. Somehow it worked perfectly. Starboy became a celebration of Abel's newfound stardom, creating a character who was confident, egotistical, and outrageously successful. Building off the lavish collaborations of his previous album, he brought even more high-profile and eclectic names: Daft Punk, Lana Del Rey, Kendrick Lamar, Future, and Diplo. Abel transitioned from being indie-inspired to making full-blown blockbusters. Starboy was a commercial success, and it got good reviews too, but it did get some criticism. A lot of people felt that Starboy was too polished and that it pushed too far into pop, sounding almost bland or nondescript. And I think that's a fair opinion to have. If there were any Weeknd album that could be considered not great or not amazing, I think Starboy would be that record. But
yeah, I think we all can agree that that's the one. Like it's just like, again, there's nothing wrong with it. Like I remember there was a bunch of fucking V-Lone light skinned dudes fucking rocking that. I remember that whole time, but it's still fairly decent. It's just like it's not, as an album, it's not like that. Of course, it's a great song. Starboy is a great song. Um, I already mentioned all the songs that I like out of that. Probably my favorite one is "Die for You." Um, but still, it's just it's I would say it's probably his worst in that sense. But it's still, I understand why he did it in that sense. But I feel like even within the most popular album, you could still do something about it. But of course, he did that later on. So he did that with After Hours, which that's fine.
But at the same time, Abel is a pop star looking to make pop hits, but nothing on Starboy doesn't follow his heart and his vision. Starboy is a really interesting album full of themes of hard-earned success, the feeling of going from a homeless drug addict with a dream to one of the world's biggest pop stars in 6 short years. To imply that Starboy is shallow shows a lack of willingness to really engage in the songs. Let's talk about the title track. Yes, he's singing about having a collection of luxury cars, but his tone, especially through the chorus, it hints back at that melancholy and depression that was much more prolific in his earlier work. He says, "Look what you've done here. I'm a star boy," almost like a sarcastic taunt to the listener and even himself. He's achieved his dreams of being one of the biggest pop stars, but in the end, was all the partying, was all the empty relationships really worth it? Does he even really want this anymore? And the darkness of his visuals continues as well. He visualizes his own death multiple times in the videos for False Alarm and Starboy, the latter in which his new persona suffocates his old one to death. While these ideas and themes are subtle, they're strung throughout the album and would bubble over completely with his next release. In terms of sound, it's similar to Beauty Behind the Madness. The songs on Starboy are a perfect sonic time capsule from 2016. The title track, False Alarm, Party Monster, I Feel It Coming, these were inescapable hits and they're inseparable from their time.
Now I'm mixing up the drink. I just need a girl who gon' really understand. I just need a girl who gon' really understand. And I seen her get rich here in the pool. I seen her, I knew she had to know. I seen her.
Still, though, a lot of fans were clamoring for the old Weeknd, the man who sang about pills and toxic relationships with a dark, gritty sound. In many ways, that was missing from Starboy. It's up to you whether or not you like it. I personally think it's pretty good, but it did make a huge commercial impact and allow Abel to continue growing as a major pop star internationally. The Weeknd's next album, After Hours, may be his magnum opus. Every single theme he's ever written about, it culminates on this record with brilliantly concise, beautifully heartbreaking lyrics about themes of self-loathing, loneliness, and heartbreak. And his love of movies and visual storytelling is right there too, with gorgeous music videos and a psychedelic aesthetic unlike anything else, taking inspirations from movies like Uncut Gems, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Speaking of that movie, because I know they were gonna bring it up. By the way, wait. This right here. I just bought it, like actually right now, because well, not because of him, man. Like I already knew that movie, but like I just recently saw a video. Probably I'll watch it with you guys after watching it, but there's a collection of films specifically because I remember that when I was a filmmaker before, I was compared to Terry Gilliam, and he directed this movie and he directed Brazil, and those are the two movies that I'm getting. And I think I was just watching this film, and even just the little moments of it, just the concept of the film, and then also that it's about Hunter S. Thompson, and it's about and just the aesthetic. It encapsulated me, it captivated me, right away. So yeah, I'm glad I got it. So there's that. I'm also getting this other film called Suspiria, but that's for another time. But yeah, very glad that I got it. All right.
And Casino. But most of all, his pop appeal.
Wait. 42? Yeah, I'm just checking.
After Hours had the biggest debut of The Weeknd's entire career with almost 500,000 sales in the first week. And
that's amazing. I witnessed that like right in front of me, 2020. Like it was amazing. And I couldn't be more glad that it was done for him because it's like you combine the greatest conceptual album and it has this market success. That is a rare thing for that to happen. And fuck the Grammys for not nominating him. Like, it's just
production. It mixes insanely catchy synthwave pop sounds with off-the-beaten-path dream pop and drum and bass in a way that makes it feel like a gigantic feat of pop appeal and a work of substance at the same time. After Hours is by far one of the greatest pop masterpieces released in the 21st century so far, if not the absolute best. So what made After Hours so incredibly successful and good? All of Abel's influences and ideas, dark alternative R&B, glossy 80s style synth tracks, honest and hedonistic lyrics, and dark, surreal, cinematic visual influences, it all reaches its peak on After Hours. And while he has been striving for distinct eras throughout his career, After Hours represents an even tighter and more finely tuned artistic vision. It was announced in late 2019 by a single tweet: "Tonight we start a brain-melting psychotic chapter." And for the next 2 years, from this tweet until his Super Bowl show in 2021, Abel would appear publicly wearing the same costume, the same red suit, the same facial hair, the same makeup, the same glasses, Every single time he went live or on a talk show or for an interview or at a concert, he was fully embodying a new character and telling a story through every single music video and live performance, even dropping a short film to go along with the record. The album's narrative follows The Weeknd as he's driven slowly insane and becomes more battered and hurt and in pain from the emptiness of celebrity life in Los Angeles, following a relapse into the destructive behavior from his past. At the end of the story, the self-destruction takes him home.
Johnson, you're fired. Why? It's not you. It's your shirt. But it's Casual Friday. Well, you've taken it.
Whole, and he turns to ideas of death and transcendence as the only way to depict the true devastation in his heart. After Hours is a truly dark album, whereas I think in the past The Weeknd made a lot of dark songs. The weight of his sadness is immense on After Hours, as he finds no other way to describe his sadness other than the image of leaving life itself behind. It's impossible to tell the story of After Hours without mentioning its singles, because they were massive. Heartless was a major success, being Abel's 4th #1 hit, but Blinding Lights was on a whole different scale. It's one of, if not the biggest pop song of the 21st century so far. It hit #1 for 4 weeks. It spent more weeks in the top 10 than any other song in history, and it spent a total of 90 weeks on the charts, making it the longest charting single of all time. That's nearly 2 years on the charts. It topped the charts in Canada and England and dozens of other countries. And to this day, Blinding Lights is the most streamed song in Spotify history with over 3.4 billion streams. But even above all that, Blinding Lights is still a good track. You know, most extremely popular songs just aren't that good. But
This is like an example of a pop song that is, I consider it to be a great masterpiece. I do, honestly. Like, what is not great about it? There's like that cinematic beginning, that and then the way it ends. It's like a lot of people, they don't like to say like one particular thing. Like, for example, like Ye's, one of his biggest hits is Power. Power is an amazing, masterful song, and I'm so glad that it's #1. So it's the same case with this.
These singles from After Hours are both extremely mainstream and true to the themes of the album. I wouldn't say I still love hearing Heartless and Blinding Lights after hearing them 10,000 times, but as far as songs go that have billions of streams, I vastly prefer Blinding Lights to God's Plan or Believer by Imagine Dragons.
100%, 100%, 100%. And I still will listen.
After Hours debuted at #1 with almost 500,000 copies sold in a week, producing 3 #1 hits and giving The Weeknd enough cultural cachet to perform the Super Bowl halftime show in 2021. The Weeknd had finally reached the very top of the pyramid. But even more than that, After Hours was a genuine cultural phenomenon. Abel was finally the real king of pop, having produced an album that could be considered not only inescapably popular, but also perfect, at least in the eyes of many, if not all of his fans. I personally love After Hours. I really do. I think it has the perfect combination of the darkness and mix of styles that we heard on Trilogy with all the
I love After Hours. I love After Hours.
Amazing.
It's all in the fucking goth stores of Hot Topic and shit like that. But I'm glad, I'm super glad that that's the case. Like, I just am. Like, it's...
production like drum and bass on songs like Too Late and Hardest to Love. Or the dream pop sounds on tracks like Faith Until I Bleed Out, giving the record a ghostly, empty feel.
This is my favorite song out of the album.
After Hours is so accessible, yet there's so much going on at the same time in a way that very few albums ever achieve. I think it's a lot more balanced than anything Abel made before. Beauty Behind the Madness and Starboy were incredibly successful projects, and there are lots of songs I love from those albums, but ultimately I think the production on those records is a lot less cinematic and timeless than After Hours. There are some iconic moments on both of those albums, but I think overall it's a bit too shiny, and I don't want to say bland, but it's not exactly spicy either. Whereas I think After Hours really uses its production to create a much darker atmosphere than Abel had in a long time, while also reaching to much higher commercial heights than Trilogy or Kissland. And I think his vocal performances, lyrics, and persona also improved a lot between 2016 and 2020. In some inexplainable way, I think the Weeknd character didn't feel that convincing until After Hours, probably in a lot of ways because he hadn't quite fleshed out the themes of suffering until this point. Yeah, his songs could be pretty messed up and pretty dark, but the lyrics and presentation weren't always there to sell the atmosphere. After Hours, though, is full of real suffering. It contains by far his deepest meditations on sadness, with songs like Snow Child diving into his troubled past and Escape from LA reflecting on his adult regrets more so than ever before.
I used to pray when I was 16. If I didn't make it, then I'd probably make my wrist bleed. Not to mislead, turn my nightmares into big dreams.
The story of After Hours really follows the Weeknd's character in a meaningful way. It shows how all the drugs, all the partying, all the women led him to a dark and hopeless place. And everything about After Hours feels more intense than whatever he'd done before. After Hours sustained massive commercial success for around 2 years after it came out. This album was everywhere. But that didn't stop Abel from seeking out yet another artistic rebirth. In January 2022,
Yeah. This one was kind of a surprise, but I'm glad it came. I love Gasoline out of this album. I really do. I think it's yeah, I love it. I love it. What can I say? I love it. All right, let's get through this.
Abel dropped Dawn FM with just a week's notice, as not just a new album, but a direct sequel to After Hours. Pushing even further into the 1980s sound that After Hours dabbled in, Dawn FM leans heavy on house, synth pop, new wave, and even some disco sounds. The album also represents, in my opinion, Abel's biggest thematic growth. The nihilism he's always relied on is deconstructed as a response to the themes of After Hours. And at the same time, he continued to push boundaries with the production, the concepts, and the presentation of the record, being a huge departure from anything he'd done in the past. What you have to know is the concept and motifs of Dawn FM are pretty important to any understanding of what it's really about. So let's break it down. Dawn FM is themed as a ghostly radio show that plays as you follow the light through the tunnel into the afterlife. Not to sound like you're listening to the radio, but that the album is the radio. And Abel went all out to make sure that the effect wasn't a gimmicky trick, but instead he used it as a way to make Dawn FM a beautiful existential odyssey. And we have to start with Jim Carrey.
That's a perfect way to describe it. A beautiful existential odyssey. Damn, bro. That's why I love this guy. That's why I love this guy. He explains it right well. I can't wait to talk to this guy. I want to. A beautiful existential. I'm gonna write that in my story, on my IG story. I'm gonna be all pretentious talking about my life is finna be a beautiful existential odyssey. What I wrote it down right here. Look at that. I don't even know if you can read it right, but
You know, I mentioned all throughout this video that The Weeknd loves movies, and he's been putting cinematic references and motifs in his music and videos from the
that's how I also relate to him. I love movies.
very beginning. And Dawn FM is the ultimate manifestation of that. Because Jim
Jim
Carrey,
Carrey
one of the most
said
legendary
it at the
actors
same
around,
time.
narrates Dawn FM the way that a DJ
Meet your next pillow.
Bro,
Why do we make our
you
pillow in the
ruin
shape
everything.
of a cube? I'll tell you.
would narrate a hip-hop mixtape. He plays this kind of menacing yet soothing character whose job it is to guide you into the unknown of the afterlife, and he executes it perfectly. He's only on 3 tracks, 1, 7, and 16, but he really made a mark on the project with his silky delivery and his existential reflections on life and death. And as an aside, I also think it's really cool that Josh Safdie, the director of Uncut Gems, which was Abel's first major film role back in 2019, also has a little tiny cameo on track 12 during one of the interludes. Nothing major, but I think it was a nice touch. Overall, I think Dawn FM is a very creatively ambitious project. It plays with many different sounds, from the liminality of the vaporwave on Out of Time to the ridiculously gorgeous singing on Less Than Zero. And the production is also shockingly good. But when you look at the liner notes and you realize that the majority of songs were produced by either Max Martin or Daniel Lopatin, the composer of the Uncut Gems soundtrack, also known as 106 Point Never, it's not a big surprise that Dawn FM is downright gorgeous. I personally don't like synthwave sounds. I usually think the songs can be pretty corny and more or less tasteless, but tracks like Gasoline, Sacrifice, and Take My Breath do a great job at feeling shiny and retrofuturistic without ever venturing into the territory of sounding like a video game soundtrack.
I was born in a city where the winter nights don't ever sleep, so there's life.
And I also love the city pop, the soft rock, and the disco inspirations that can be found throughout the album. And you know, it's not easy to make an album with so many different influences and actually have it work. Like I mentioned earlier, I just usually associate synthwave with the background of a YouTube commercial or a video game montage, and I really don't like the sound of the genre. I really feel like synthwave is one of those Reddit genres like electro swing or chiptune that isn't really a bad concept, but somehow no one has ever executed it in a way that sounds good. But if there's any producer who could take a played out and contrived sound and really make it beautiful, of course it would be 106 Point Never. If you listen to his past work, whether it's his own work or his work on soundtracks for the Safdie brothers, he really knows how to add amazing atmosphere into a song. He has so many timeless tracks, but if I had to pick one, the song Mohegan Suite from the Uncut Gems soundtrack would be a perfect example of his talent. I think popular synthwave tracks like Night Call can be so in-your-face and unrefined, but The Weeknd and 106 Point Never had a great idea to mix this synthwave sound with disco and R&B and soul to keep it smooth, classy, classic, and fun, instead of making Dawn FM sound like a Rocket League montage. And I think that The Weeknd's collaborations with Daft Punk from Starboy may have given him some major inspiration in this way. The way that Daft Punk can throw a billion different effects and instruments and samples into one song and make it sound fun reminds me of the same way that Dawn FM doesn't take itself too seriously. It has a beautifully serious sound, but at the same time the tracks are full of little quirks and effects and small pieces of uniqueness everywhere you look. And speaking of the record sounding smooth and fun, I think overall Dawn FM is a much lighter album than any Weeknd project before it, in every way, from the production being more lighthearted to the lyrics feeling more optimistic than ever before. There is still nihilism and suffering and darkness on songs like Gasoline or Sacrifice, but the general story arc of Dawn FM seems to attack the same themes as After Hours, but from an uplifting and bright angle. I wouldn't call it a heavenly or uplifting record, but
No, I'm checking real quick. All right, cool.
because it still does feel kind of sinister in the same way that The Weeknd always has. Maybe he'll save that uplifting heavenly sound for the third part of the trilogy, but rather Dawn FM feels like a state of purgatory or transition. Dawn, you know, the beginning of a new day. And you do feel this sentiment all throughout the record, and it does culminate in Dawn FM being a very unique experience unlike anything The Weeknd made before. In the bloviating words of Pitchfork, the sound of Dawn FM is decadent because it's so discordant. Each song is sumptuously saturated with instrumental quirks. Dawn FM is a cavernous album, and the surprises on its tracks can feel like hidden crystalline chambers. A sample from a 1983 Japanese city pop song slips into a shimmery ballad. A Beach Boys member coos background vocals while Tyler, the creator, howls, "You gonna sign this prenup." Although I have to be honest, the features from Tyler and Lil Wayne may be the weakest part of.
Yeah, I didn't see the point in any of that. I'm gonna be honest. I've been waiting for honestly for like Ye to appear in like in one of these albums. But I don't know if he could production wise, obviously, but like as a feature, I'm trying to wonder how he would fit in. I don't think he would. Not only afterwards, but well, I don't know. We'll see.
Of Dawn FM. They're not bad, but they're not great either. At least in my mind, the album's production, vocals, spoken word, and themes are a lot more interesting than those features, and I do feel a little confused as to why The Weeknd kept them in. But despite its beautiful production and vocals, and the way that Abel pushed his craft to the next level in every way on Dawn FM, it didn't perform nearly as well as had been expected, especially after the insane success of After Hours. Dawn FM's first week sales dropped to less than half that of After Hours, and it didn't even top the charts. And as crazy as this sounds, it doesn't have nearly as many streams as his other projects. Only half the songs have over 100 million plays on Spotify. And even though it may have flopped in some people's minds, I think Dawn FM is easily the second best.
Where does the poop go? Really? If someone's backed up and constipated for 2-3 days or even a week,
Weeknd album. Right behind After Hours and slightly ahead of Kissland is just such a strong production. The vocals, the creative vision, the visuals, it's all impeccably well crafted, and I love how The Weeknd just keeps making these albums that are as good as they are popular. But why did Dawn FM fail? I think one of the obvious answers is that Abel and his team hardly dedicated any time at all to promoting the project. They only announced Dawn FM's release date 4 days in advance, and they didn't put nearly as much time into music videos and singles, I think mainly because the singles for After Hours were still overwhelmingly popular when Dawn FM came out. After Hours was so big, there just wasn't enough space for him to drop an album in a traditional way. With that being said, there are some artists who can do a surprise drop and still have it work out. So there must be other factors as to why Dawn FM didn't do as well as it was expected to. They only announced Dawn FM's release date 4 days in advance, and they didn't put nearly as much time into music videos and singles, I think mainly because the singles for After Hours were still charting and they were still going viral when Dawn FM came out. It's almost like After Hours was so big that there just wasn't enough space for him to drop an album again so soon. That being said, there are tons of artists that can do a surprise drop and still have a huge release, like Beyonce and Eminem. So there must be other factors as to why Dawn FM didn't do as well as it was expected to. I think one of the big reasons why Dawn FM just didn't sell as well is because it's a weird album compared to his previous work. From the old man character, to the track sequencing with the interludes and the spoken word, to the radio station aesthetic and the album concept, I don't think these songs were made to top the charts. Plus, The Weeknd as an 80-year-old man in full makeup, prosthetics, and a wig doesn't really scream pop appeal either. And as much as I hate to say it, because I love the production on Dawn FM so much, I don't think the 80s sound is extremely appealing to the mainstream right now. All that being said, I still think Dawn FM is one of the best Weeknd albums. I think it's an amazing record with great soundscapes, gorgeous production, and a really unique and interesting concept. It also contains some of the best lyrics and melodies of Abel's entire career. And you know, I think if he had kept going with the Starboy sound, he wouldn't be where he is today. Beauty Behind the Madness and Starboy are really good albums, but they're long and they don't have a central story or theme, and they're also full of some pretty forgettable tracks. I think in the early days of Abel's career, he had this raw edge that made his music dark and strange and fascinating, and in the middle of that career, he traded that X factor for the mainstream sound he needed to become a pop star. But now that he's reached a mind-blowing level of success, 100 million monthly listeners on Spotify, he can go back and make the masterpieces he was always capable of. After Hours and Dawn FM are two of the best albums I've ever heard. They're my favorite pop albums ever, and I think they're a shining example of how interesting pop can be when it feels elevated through the depth of its production and lyrics, and it's amazing how far The Weeknd has come as an artist in the past 10 years. In a time when most pop albums are underwhelming at best, and pop stars don't have nearly the same cultural pull as they did in the past, The Weeknd is one of the few artists still pushing the medium forward. Are underwhelming at best, and pop stars don't have nearly the same cultural pull as they did in the past, The Weeknd is one of the few artists still pushing the medium forward. And not only is he doing that, but he's making a mark in music history as one of the most iconic artists of our time. The Weeknd's success is incredible, especially for his rise from total obscurity in just 10 years. He's gone from an enigmatic indie singer with artsy, mysterious presentation and an alternative sound to possibly the most commercially successful, iconic musical artist alive. The first person to ever break.
It's funny because it's only it's only like a guy with the Michael Jackson falsetto, like that can go from like an indie type of sound and then take it to this extreme extent where it's it's pop, and it's not only pop but it's the most popular. It's like it makes sense, but I'm glad that that's the case.
100 million monthly listeners on Spotify. He makes songs for parties, nightclubs, shopping malls, or lonely nights by yourself as you try to make sense of your life. To me, what sets him apart is his ability to constantly reinvent himself time and time again, presenting a persona that's both artistically true to where he's at, while also creating hits. To take the darkest, most honest parts of his life and turn them into pop sing-along anthems. For a guy who started making music while homeless on the freezing streets of Toronto, for someone who keeps his life private and speaks to us only through his music, he has come incredibly far with his art, and he wouldn't be who he is without that backstory. You couldn't make what he makes if you're just some boring industry plant. When you see the videos of Abel singing in the cold in the middle of the night with no money or fame to his name, you can see that he always had what it took to truly become someone. Not just anyone, but an artist that would change the face of pop music by making some of the best albums of his entire generation. From the enigmatic strangeness of Trilogy to the immense grandeur of Beauty Behind the Madness and Starboy to the cinematic journey of After Hours and Dawn FM, he's made a huge impact on the world of music, especially because he's never given up on his vision and only continues to improve on the sound and presentation of his work. The Weeknd is a timeless artist. He's one of my favorite singers of all time, and with such an amazing vision for his work, the fact that he's the most streamed artist in the world with over 100 million monthly listeners is just a nice bonus on top of his incredible work that only gets better and better with time. This has been the story of The Weeknd. I'm Philip. This is Volksgeist. Thank you for watching. And of course, don't forget.
Nice. All right, guys, that was a nice video. I think my ending point with all of that is that, yeah, what could I say? I mean, he's absolutely one of my favorite artists, and as I told you before, you're gonna get to know me more and more, and that's just one of the elements of things. It's like, yeah, he's absolutely one of my favorite artists. He's just like, this is like the one instance where like you see like a popular artist and you're like wondering like why the fuck, why, like it's like you wonder why, like I don't get it. Like, yes, you're talented, yes, you're like that, but I just don't get it why you're up there, why you're that popular. And this is the one case where it's like, yes, this is exactly what I've always wanted to see. I've wanted to see someone who has a beautiful voice, has great taste, has an orchestrative element to them, and uses all those abilities and sort of visions and uses it to its complete advantage. and he's the one instance of that. Like he's just like it's the same thing with like MJ. It's like you know these people they take advantage of the position that they're in, as opposed to the other people where like they have jack shit. Like they may have a beautiful voice, but you're just a voice, or and stuff like that. It's like they don't do anything special with it. So he's the one artist that not only has arguably one of the best voices because you got something that's modeled out of one of the greatest artists, not one, the greatest artist of all time, Michael Jackson. And he's modeling that, like he's modeled after that and made it even so much better. Personally, what I like, what I've always wanted to see, which is my favorite genre, it's like indie alternative, grungy kind of sound. You mix that with this MJ falsetto voice, and it's like it's the most beautiful thing. And you further develop that into like a conceptual albums that have an overall theme to it and everything. It's everything that ever wanted a pop artist to do, and he's just the answer of that. So yeah, I'm very glad that he's up there as a number one. Just I'm super glad because it just feels like justice. Like when you see other people being up there, I'm like, fuck, Ed Sheeran. Like I mean, yeah, you've seen good, but like oh, come on, like it's just so like you want to see someone do something with the position that they're in, and they're not, and they're doing jack shit. Like they're just not doing anything. And so when you see that instance, that moment happen, it's like, yes, it's like finally, yes. And so that's just the case. But yeah, overall, I would say I'm glad about that, and that's the case. But yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. We're gonna probably watch the usual. I'm actually gonna make it like the usual and internalize all the other stuff, but we'll know tomorrow. But yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. And wait a minute. Um, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and peace.